Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Hanrahan.
And I'm Tom Sherry. Jane has the night off. Two on your side found the re-election campaign for Eastern Washington Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers accepted more than $100,000 over the last few years from Big Pharma. Now, while those same companies were also jacking up the cost of your prescription drugs.
The Congresswoman never did agree to our request for an interview, and as Two on Your Side's Whitney Ward explains, now those aren't the only questions we're having difficulty getting answers to.
When I first started planning this follow-up story, I was just going to show you an email that came from Cathy McMorris Rodgers to one of our Creme 2 viewers. They'd written to her angry that she had accepted so much money from Big Pharma while also claiming she was trying to fight those big pharmaceutical companies and lower your drug costs. Shortly after our story aired in December, the Congresswoman did respond, not to me, but to that Creme 2 viewer. And since then, I've reached out to her on multiple occasions to question her about those contributions and other issues. Now, 3 months later, we finally have a response. Sort of.
Cathy, where are you?
It's an almost weekly scene outside the local offices for Representative Cathy McMorris Rodgers.
Cathy McMorris Rodgers, during the congressional recess, failed to hold a single in-person public event.
Voters frustrated about the Congresswoman's lack of availability to ask questions face-to-face.
I've always believed in our system, and I think it's broken.
It's important to speak with Cathy McMorris and have a conversation.
But back in November, people were questioning this, more than $100,000 in contributions to McMorris Rodgers' re-election campaigns from political action committees of drug companies. At the time, I repeatedly asked her office for an interview, but was turned down. So you might be asking, what's the big deal? We know big companies lobby politicians all the time. After our story aired, I got multiple messages from Two on Your Side viewers who said they would now be contacting the Congresswoman to question what we found. Then one of those voters sent this to me, an email from Cathy McMorris Rodgers herself. It said Creme 2's story confuses political action committees to which any private citizen can donate with corporations. She went on to say there are limits to each contribution she receives from any entity and that her campaign is overwhelmingly funded through grassroots support. Here's what I said back in December. I found public records of multiple donations from the political action committees for Merck, Amgen, and other big drug companies just this year. The fact is, the political action committees for over a dozen major drug companies did contribute more than $100,000 to the Congresswoman's re-election campaigns. By the way, Merriam-Webster defines a political action committee as a group formed by an industry to raise and contribute money to the campaigns of candidates likely to advance the group's interests. In her email to Creme 2 viewer John, McMorris Rodgers also said she has a long track record of supporting access to quality, affordable medications, and that moving forward she will continue to champion policies that promote advancements in medicine and help make healthcare more accessible and affordable for seniors and families in Eastern Washington.
The children that are coming in.
But again, after my repeated requests to question the Congresswoman directly about her efforts, I was denied.
You need others.
In fact, since November, I've reached out to the Congresswoman's office nearly a dozen times through emails, voicemails, and text messages. She has made multiple public appearances but never once agreed to talk, although just last week I did receive this statement from her press secretary. It said the Congresswoman's top priority is making sure the people of Eastern Washington have access to affordable, quality health care. It touted her support for access to rural health care, legislation to protect those with pre-existing conditions, and her efforts to repeal Obamacare. It said nothing about campaign contributions from drug company PACs.
I do believe it is important.
But that wasn't the only thing I wanted to ask the Congresswoman. I had hoped to also question her about her recent telephone town hall meeting. Some constituents have vented frustration, asking why she won't meet with them in person. Again, her office didn't respond to my request for an interview, but did send Creme 2 this statement saying the Congresswoman wants to hear from everyone because hearing from all sides makes her a better representative. It went on to say the Congresswoman is hard at work in the nation's capital, advancing the priorities important to everyone in Eastern Washington.
There's deep anger and there's great fear out there, and I think an elected official can calm those fears.
So since I never heard back from McMorris Rodgers herself, I turned to the man who held that position before her,
were able to get it passed in the House.
Republican and former 5th District Representative George Nethercutt, who served Eastern Washington for 10 years.
If you're in an elected position, you should stand up before your constituents and answer their questions and explain your actions. It's like being called into the boss's office. You don't say, no, I'll call you, or you can call me. You say, I'll come in.
Do you see it as just part of this job?
It's part of the job. And you signed up for it.
To be fair, this is hardly the first time lawmakers have been accused of avoiding angry voters. Democrats took plenty of blows after President Obama was elected in 2008. And there are plenty of people across Eastern Washington who believe McMorris Rodgers is doing a great job of representing the 5th District. These are comments from her Facebook page. And she isn't the only Republican member of Congress who's opted for telephone town halls and Facebook Live sessions instead of facing the crowds head-on. And honestly, can you blame her?
That money's mine. It's not hers.
But Nethercutt believes avoiding the confrontation is a short-term solution to a long-term problem.
It's a way to mask your fear of being criticized.
Do you think that one town hall meeting could go a long way in kind of easing some of that frustration that voters have right now?
Oh, sure. I think any elected official has to explain himself or herself what your actions have been, what the plans are going to be. The constituents want to know. They have a right to know.
And some of those constituents are finding ways to put the pressure on. This online wanted poster with the Congresswoman's face declares her missing, just like these stickers we spotted on milk cartons and other grocery items in several Spokane stores.
No one likes to be criticized, and I think that's what they try to avoid.
So as someone who has held this seat before, right here in Eastern Washington, what is your advice? What would you say to these current representatives who are using some of these avoidance tactics?
I think you have to get around to your people.
Tell me what democracy looks like! He believes the boil over from angry voters will eventually simmer down as long as everyone does their part.
Offer suggestions to Representative McMorris Rodgers and suggest ways that they can solve the problems that exist. They gave me ideas, and it helped me do my job better.
What about my job as a journalist? Asking questions and sometimes criticizing people in your position.
It's okay to criticize. I think that's part of your job. I think you have to hold, as George Bush said recently, you have to hold elected officials accountable. It's not fake news to say, wait a minute, why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. But if you hold me accountable, it's better for everybody.
To be very clear, this story is about the frustration of voters who have wanted to meet with the Congresswoman face-to-face, as well as my repeated attempts to ask her questions directly. As I mentioned before, the last time I spoke with the Congresswoman's office, I was told she would not be available for direct questions, but my invitation still stands, and I look forward to hearing from her and sharing her side. In the studio tonight, Whitney Ward, KREM 2 News.